September 1939, the German foe begins its ruthless march of conquest and sets the stage for World War II.
JRTV today is a very lucky television station. We have the pleasure of having with us from Italy, Franco Perlasca. Franco is the son of Georgio Perlasca, who 78 years ago saved thousands of Jews in Budapest, Hungary. Georgio passed away 30 years ago, and for many, many years, people did not know of what he did in Budapest. He didn't talk about it with his family, and not until a lady who was saved by him in Budapest, who started looking for him, did everything come out in the open. And that's when the family started to find out about Giorgio. And then later, the rest of the world started finding out about Giorgio. So let's have Franco in Italy, and translating for me will be newspaper reporter in Hungary and friend of mine, Janos Betlen. Hello, Franco. Buongiorno.
Hello. Buongiorno. Buongiorno a voi tutti.
Nice to have you on the screen today.
Grazie.
The time when you found out that your father did what he did in Budapest, when was that?
Esattamente nel 1986.
I got the news exactly in 1987 when a Hungarian lady was looking for a Spanish diplomat called Georgio Perlasca. First, she must have looked for him in Spain, then ended up in Padova, where she found, instead of a Spanish diplomat, an Italian pensioner. The nice side of the story is that when he came back to Italy in 1945 from Hungary, he never spoke about this thing, either in public or within the family.
Io sono nato un po' di anni dopo la fine della guerra, nel 1944.
I was born in 1954, and I didn't know anything about all this. He spoke to me about Hungary, about Budapest, but nothing about what he actually did to save people. He just spoke to me about Hungarian cuisine and the nice things to see in Budapest, everyday life, nothing else.
In Italia, cose di questo genere, la sua storia assolutamente no. Quando sono venuto a saperlo nel 1987, chiaramente
then I was informed about what he did in Hungary, it was a huge surprise for me, and I wondered why on earth he hadn't spoken about this at all.
Devo dire che ci ho messo qualche anno.
And it took me about 7 or 8 years to find out or find an answer
a una soluzione di questo piccolo problema. Ed è stato l'incontro con uno dei salvati, dei sopravvissuti.
And the solution came from a meeting with a Holocaust survivor who had been saved by my father, namely Georgio Perlasca, a Hungarian-born Italian writer who wrote for theater and for cinema, a very well-known Italian author he became later on. And he told me one particular thing that opened my eyes.
Mi ha raccontato una storia. Mi ha raccontato il racconto della tradizione ebraica, quello dei 36 giusti.
He told me about the ancient Jewish story of the 36 just people. There are always 36 just people in the world who only appear on the scene when there is a great tragedy to be faced, and then they do something to alleviate the plight of other people. And when the tragedy is over, they disappear into normality and they never talk about it.
Perché? per un motivo molto
They
semplice.
simply think that they have only done what they had to do.
Nulla di più e nulla di meno. Giorgio Perlasca,
Giorgio Perlasca was one of those righteous, and as such he was recognized in Israel, and a tree was planted in his honor in Jerusalem. And as one of those righteous, he didn't have the right to talk about what he did. He just did his duty.
Did your mother know anything about this at all?
No, non ne sapeva
No,
assolutamente
no,
nulla.
neither did my mother know anything about it.
Sapeva che era
She was
in
also
Ungheria, che lei sarebbe
going
dovuta
to
andare in
go
Ungheria,
with him
lui poi
to
ha
Hungary
avuto le
or
sue
follow
motive
him,
a
but
Trieste,
in the meantime,
quindi
the
non è potuto
borders
andare.
were
Sono
closed
stati
at
separati 2 anni e
Trieste
mezzo.
and she couldn't.
Dalla
And
fine
therefore,
del
they lived separate
1942
lives
a luglio
from
del
the end of 1942
1945, quando
to
lui è
July
riuscito a
1945,
tornare a
when my
Trieste.
father returned to Italy.
Israel recognized your father as a righteous Christian, rightfully so. We of the Mensch Foundation also recognize him, and he'll be getting the Mensch Award posthumously in October when we show the film here in San Francisco. Has the Italian government recognized the heroic deeds of your father?
L'Italia è un bellissimo paese.
Italy is a beautiful country, it's a fantastic country. It has its merits and its failings, but in any case, it is a bit slow.
Lui è stato ritrovato nel 1987.
In 87, he was invited to Hungary, and the parliament held a session in his honor, and he was awarded the Order of Saint Stephen there. Then he was decorated in Spain. He was awarded the Order of Isabella the Catholic. And then he went to the United States. He was given the Wallenberg Medal, and he also inaugurated one of the wings of the would-be Holocaust Museum in the United States.
Stavo finendo prima tutto il discorso. Dicevo che
I didn't finish the story about Italy's being slow, but actually something happened.
Nel 1992 assolutamente no, non ne aveva dato praticamente nulla.
In fact, he had gotten many medals and so on in several countries, as I said. Nothing in Italy until 1992. But then he actually was awarded the gold medal for civic heroism, which is a big thing in Italy. And this happened in May 92, and he died in August 1992, and he never got the medal. He never got the news either, because from Rome to Padova is such a huge distance that it took the medal some time to get there.
Thank you for the interview today. Thank you very much, and hope to see you sometime in Padova. Ciao.
Certamente, speriamo. Grazie a voi.
Thank you, and thank you for what you're doing in order to keep the memory of Georgio Perlasca alive.
A ricordo di Giorgio Perlasca.
Grazie. Ciao.
Ciao.
From the Blazer Archives, we have a wonderful talk from Rabbi David Wolpe of the Temple Sinai in Los Angeles, and he made this speech at a Holocaust Remembrance program in Los Angeles a while back.
About 30 years ago, my father received a phone call from a rabbi who lived not far from us, who told him that years before he had purchased a set of Talmud that had come over from Europe, and he never opened them. He stored them in boxes in his garage, and he forgot about them until one day it rained and the garage began to leak. And he worried about the books, and so he ran out to see that the boxes were saturated, and he began to rip them open and to take out the volumes and to leaf through the pages to see what damage had been done. And he opened one of the obscure and little studied tractates, something he would never otherwise have seen. And as he leafed through the pages, he stopped because he saw writing in the margin. And the writing was in Yiddish. And it said, "My name is Shmuel. Tomorrow they come for me. I have studied up to this line. If by some miracle this book should survive, please study on for me." And that is why we're here. We're here because by some miracle, some survived. And because we owe a debt to the past and a debt to memory and a promise to those who perished. The Shoah is such a powerful experience, such an unprecedented happening in the history of humanity that there is a temptation to use it for something else. And we will say, we have to remember so the Jewish people stay strong. We have to remember so we support the state of Israel. We have to remember so that our children will stay close to the tradition. And all those things are true. And all of them are important, but they are not the fundamental reason. We remember because those who died deserve to be remembered. When we use their memory for something else, we have to also at the same time say, if there were no other reason, if we lived in a secure world and the state of Israel was not imperiled, we still must remember, because each of you, every single one of you who is a survivor, you remember someone whom no one else remembers. You do. You remember. Even if you didn't know them well, you remember Ruti in the camps with red hair who didn't survive, and Moti who walked with a limp, and no one else remembers him, but you remember him. And you don't want that memory to perish with you. Which is why I'm going to read you a story and then make a request. When the Warsaw Ghetto was destroyed, it was discovered that under the remarkable leadership of Emanuel Ringelblum, one of the great modern Jewish historians, 35,000 pages of history of the ghetto and its environs were written down day after day by people who perished. They wrote down the people whom they saw, whom they knew, what happened every single day. On August 3rd, 1942, with the Germans a block away from his hiding, from the building under which he was to bury the first sheaf of papers from the archive, Israel Lichtenstein hurriedly buried the papers and wrote in the instant that he gained eternity the following words. He said, "I do not ask for any thanks. I only wish to be remembered. I wish my wife to be remembered, Goethe Sechstein. I wish my little daughter to be remembered, Margalit. She is 20 months old, but she deserves to be remembered too." Working with him, with Israel Lichtenstein, were two teenagers. One was named David Graeber, and the other was Nachum Grivach. Grivach was 18 years old. And when he heard that the Germans blockaded his parents' building, this is what he wrote in his final words: "I'm going to run to my parents and see if they are all right. I don't know what's going to happen to me." And then these final words are underlined: "Remember, my name is Nachum Grivach." Remember. That was his name. And though you may know nothing else about him, though you may not know his fears or his dreams, although we may guess, every time we say the name Israel Lichtenstein, Margalit, Goethe, his wife, and Nachum Grivach and David Graeber. It is a sacred act. And I want to ask you, if you remember a name, somebody who perished in the Shoah, turn to someone around you and say the name out loud so that it will be heard. Right now, say the name.
We shall return with David Wolpe after a few minutes. Welcome back. We'll finish the show with David Wolpe, and I would like to ask you to help us with our drive to get as much money as possible, not only for this program, but for the Holocaust education that we're doing in Eastern Europe as well as here in America. Now we return to the conclusion of David Wolpe, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thousands and millions of names who are the history of our people, and we use them to promote memory, but we have to remember them. We have to speak their names. We have to be sure we do not forget. Each name you utter, each name reminds us that when we talk of God in the Jewish tradition, we say Hashem, the name. And each individual name is part of the greater name. When you leave here, tell the stories of the names that you remember. And if you are not a survivor, remember that we too must be witnesses. We too have to carry on the story and pronounce the name. We too have a sacred trust. We too have to remember those who perished, who they were, their name. When the Allies came into the concentration camp of Theresienstadt, where over 100,000 children were interred and only a handful emerged alive, they tore up the floorboards of the barracks, and there they found sheaves of paper, the drawings, the poems, the writings of the children who had died. And in those poems and in those drawings, we can see the last moments. And there is a poem. It's from a child who did not leave his or her name. We don't know how old he was, 10, 11, 12 years old. Was he a boy or a girl? We don't know. What we do know is that looking out at the hell, the barbed wire, the cruelty, the guards of Theresienstadt, he wrote the bird song. And this is the memory that he tosses across the generations from inside the ghetto walls from the camp of Theresienstadt. He wrote, "He doesn't know the world at all, who stays in his nest and doesn't go out. He doesn't know what birds know best, nor what I want to sing about, that the world is full of loveliness. When dewdrops sparkle in the grass and earth's aflood with morning light, a blackbird sings upon a bush to greet the dawning after night, and then I know how fine it is to live. Open your heart to beauty. Go to the woods someday and weave a wreath of memory there. And then, if tears obscure your way, you'll know how wonderful it is to be alive." As we remember, tears obscure our way, but we are still alive. And we must use the greatest gift of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, of God, to remember and commemorate and to advance the causes and the dreams of those who were not given this most precious gift of time. Each Yom Kippur, we read the story of Hananiah ben Teradion, the great rabbi who was killed by the Romans, and as he was wrapped in a scroll of the Torah and set on fire, his students asked him as he literally burned to death, "Rabbi, what do you see?" And he said, "The parchment is burning, but the letters are ascending to heaven. The message endures. Sword and steel and flesh can be destroyed, but the spirit will never die. You're here. The spirit endures. You are what the prophet Jeremiah said. Ud mutzal me'esh, you are a brand. I am a brand. Each of us is plucked from the fire. And because we are given this blessing of life, we must remember, we must fight, we must endure, we must speak with one voice to the world and let them know that when we say never again, we do mean that we will fight suffering and pain everywhere in the world, that we do have a responsibility to anyone who is persecuted, who is bereaved, who is bereft, and who is alone. But also from the voice of Nachum Grivach, from that child in Theresienstadt to that soldier in Kiryat Shmona, that we remember that never again also means that never again in the history of our people will we have to repeat the names of those who were destroyed and those who were crushed because they didn't have the weapons, the ear of the world, the power, the voice that we have today. And so, as one, we tell the world again and again in the face of anyone who would seek to destroy us, Am Yisrael Chai, the nation of Israel, is still alive.